Let's see, Giovanna, can you hear me? How about you, Lena? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. And this is
Jeff Jones.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Good. Good. Where are you at, Jeff?
I'm currently at home.
No,
Delaware.
I didn't. What city are you?
Potomac, Maryland.
Potomac, Maryland. Good. All right. Well, we got a couple minutes here before we start. Hey, Michelle, can you hear me? She's probably not in her workstation.
Okay, Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Good. What city are you in?
I'm in Kansas City.
Oh, good. Did you survive the game last night?
Yeah, it was not a big deal at all. We survived just fine.
Yeah, I guess.
Watched the whole thing. So.
Yeah, I guess in Philadelphia, I don't know if it was a little bit of a public safety issue.
Right.
What they're doing, but
yeah,
you hate to see them damage a city after a sporting event.
Well, as humans, we can't help ourselves.
Well, the people in Philadelphia, you can't blame. I mean, it's been a long time for them.
Right.
Probably the parade will probably be tomorrow or Wednesday. I'm sure that city will be shut down.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that mean I'll stop getting those? Hi, this is so-and-so from the IRS, and you are now going to pay me?
No. I don't know. Okay, everyone, I have just about 12 noon, so why don't we start to get started here. Welcome to this Zoom meeting. I see as of right now, we got 31 participants and other people will probably log on as we continue here. I don't know how familiar all of you are with this modality or website or platform, but just a couple things we'll be using here in the meeting today. As you scroll down towards the bottom, there's a little pop-up scroll bar on the bottom that will come up. And one of these things will be participants. And if you click on participants, that will come up on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you select yourself, down at the bottom, is there an option to raise your hand to ask a question? So towards the end, we do some Q&A. If you raise your hand, that's how I'll know that you have a question, and then I can call on you and unmute you. The other thing that you can do here is chat down towards the bottom. You see the thing that says chat. If you click on that, then that will come up on the right-hand side of the screen. Occasionally during the session, I will ask a question, and it's easier if you just put the answer in chat as opposed to speaking. Also, when you click on participants, you can stop the video of yourself, so your name will just show up and not your face. And you can also unmute yourself that way. But hopefully we're okay technically. If anybody has any questions at this point, if you're having trouble technically, just send a message on the chat and I will see it. And let's begin the meeting. This is mental toughness. And I'm so glad all of you are taking the time to do this. And this is an image of me back a while back. Let me just go up to this. This is what I used to look like years ago when I was doing MRI scans. And this is when I got interested in neuroscience and when I got interested in mental toughness and how the brain works. And I was fascinated. I've taken probably thousands of brain scans in my life. And when I heard that the brain has electrical activity going on in it and has neurochemicals and neurotransmitters sending messages to it, I just became fascinated with it. And I wanted to say, how does this thing work and what effect does this have on our lives? And that's my name there, Kevin Stacey, Kevin at kevinstacey.com. Of course, one of my burdens in life now is that if you Google me, Google just assumes that I'm a mistake and you must be looking for Kevin Spacey, the actor, but I have a T in my name, not a P, and that's who I am. And this is what it used to look like when I would see the brain scans and started to get interested in this and the neuroscience. And I tell you, nowadays, what I do is I help people in the workplace and I help people be more effective and productive and less frustrated and able to focus their energy more on what they can control. And this topic, mental toughness, is just so needed nowadays. It seems like in our society, I'm sure we've all heard that depression rates are way up. And if you take the folks that are struggling or at some point in the year will struggle with some sort of mental health issue, and if you add them into the folks with the opioid crisis and the addictions in that, I've seen some stats lately have 1 in 3 Americans are dealing with some kind of mental health issue or some kind of an addiction issue, which is really just sad numbers. And, in this country, in America alone, we've got 5% of the world's population, but we consume over half of the world's prescription drugs, which is a big problem. And our brains can just be real jerks to us. And, and why can it be a jerk? We'll get into it. But the thought percentages from biofeedback mechanisms and from behavioral health researchers, 77% of what the average person thinks about is just negative or counterproductive. And only 23% is positive or uplifting. So I'm sure you all realize we think a lot. Some of us think more than others, and some of us wish that we could stop thinking or stop overthinking or overanalyzing too much. But our brains are a jerk, and for most of us on average, most of the thoughts we think on a daily basis just don't work for us. They're just negative and counterproductive. So the question is, and I want to make this meeting more practical, and the question is, what can we do? What actionable steps can we take to be mentally tougher? And first of all, I just wanted to ask, mental toughness, what does that phrase mean to you? I mean, I'm sure some of us even heard that with the Super Bowl last night. We heard, well, this team is mentally tough, or they're behind, or they don't think about losing. But if you could just put in the chat button there, just bring your mouse pointer down towards the bottom, you'll see a little button that says chat, a little pop-up window. But if you could just reply, what does mental toughness mean to you? Or what would it mean to you to be mentally tough in your life? And let's see what kind of responses I get here, and I'll just read them off. We've got 52 participants now, which is great. Being resilient and resiliency, high emotional intelligence, Anna says. Greg says focused. Michelle Boyd says disciplined. Being thick-skinned from Paul. Yes, that's a good one. Being equipped to deal with what comes my way. Being able to deal with adversity. Good. Some good things here and some good responses. Yeah, definitely resiliency is a theme that I'm seeing through this. composed in the face of stress, how to deal with conflict. Richard said focus, not easily rattled. Richard Craig, absolutely. I want to show you what I'm thinking, what my definition would be, is the mind itself. You know, I just think that the mind makes a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And I think we all know how powerful our brain is. And, you know, I don't know if I'd use the word mentally weak as the antigen of the opposite of mental toughness. But I tell you, I think a lot of people, just because they think it, that means they have to analyze it and dwell on it. And they let their mind suck them in a million different directions. So for me, mental toughness is realizing this mind makes a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. So I am not going to go down this road. I'm not going to let it pull me down. I need to think about how things are going to turn out. And I also love the quote that you never know how strong you are until that's all you have left, but is to be strong. Like people, for me, people that are dealing with cancer or cancer survivors, to me, are just amazing, the strength that they demonstrate. But, you know, I used to see these folks when I'd be in the radiology field and I'd be doing the follow-up scan after the radiation therapy, and they didn't know if the tumor was going to shrink, if it was coming back or what's happening. But, you know, all I knew is that a lot of them would just say to me, I just can't afford to think this. I can't afford to think that it's going to be worse or things going to go bad. I can't allow my mind to go down that road. Or if I'm behind 10 points in the Super Bowl, I can't allow my mind to think I'm going to lose the game. And that to me is really mental toughness, to be in charge of this, to be aware of what's going on. So what can we do to be mentally tough? One thing I think we all need to do is just realize why our brain is a jerk, and realize kind of the history and the evolutionary perspective of our brain. And when the light bulb goes off for you, it really kind of makes sense. And for me, when we have to look at the numbers, I think that we forget the numbers on our brain in this little evolutionary slide here. We forget that human beings are hominoids, or that version of man has been walking around upright for 4 million years. But modern man, Homo sapiens sapiens, it's only been around for 50,000 years. And 4 million years ago, our brains were 1/3 of the size that they are now. Nowadays, we've got it up to the full size, but it's been 50,000 years we've had this brain. So from an evolutionary perspective, this brain we have is cutting edge. But in functionality, the way it used to be as human beings over these 4 million years, our genetic evolution was able to keep track or keep pace with the technological advances of how human beings were living and how human society was living. But think of 50,000 years ago. Think how violent it was back then. I mean, our brains were designed for what? I mean, what is the overall of Mother Nature? What is the overall arching mission? Is to keep you alive so you can pass on your genes. And 50,000 years ago, you either had lunch or you ate lunch or you were someone's lunch. I mean, it was one or the other. So our brains in the violence of 50,000 years ago was all about, am I going to survive or not survive? And this fight or flight response that we have, and it just goes in. So if you think of the question, is there a tiger or an enemy hiding behind that bush? Yes or no? You know, your brain would rather have you get it wrong and be wrong 100 times saying, yes, there is an enemy behind that bush, than being wrong once. No, there's no enemy behind that bush. So what ends up happening here is our brains have what's called a negativity bias because of all this. So if you think of the carrot and stick analogy, you know, if we missed out on a carrot, that's fine. We'd have another chance another day to get another carrot. But if we miss out on a stick, no more passing on our genes. So our brains are much more interested on what could go wrong, what's going wrong, anticipating what's going wrong, because this is a survival mechanism. So basically what I'm saying is that your brain is a jerk, and your brain is a jerk because its mission, it's doing its job, which is to keep you alive. But what I'm also saying is that we need a major software update. Our brains are so outdated. We don't have this kind of physical violence. I mean, I can't even imagine living 1,000 years ago. I can't imagine living 100 years ago when indoor plumbing and indoor electricity was not as widespread as it is now. And imagine how our brains are changing now with how they should be changing with all these computers and technology. So we're just biased towards the negative. So to be mentally tough, you just have to, first of all, realize this. This is what my brain is interested in. It's biased towards the negative because it's trying to keep me alive, but I really just don't need this anymore. So sometimes I even say to myself, thank you, brain. I get it. I just don't need that anymore. I don't need to look at it that way. We also, to be mentally tough, we need to be more mindful. And I'm sure a lot of us have heard of the phrase mindfulness. And mindfulness is a lot more in the media nowadays, and we're hearing much more about it. And this is a Time magazine cover story from a few years ago. And I'm glad that mindfulness is much more prominent because we really need this. But I find there's some confusion in this. And what does mindfulness really mean? Well, to me, mindfulness is just being aware of what you're noticing, being aware of what you're noticing in that moment without judging it. So say you're in the shower in the morning and you're standing there, and there's very few people who are taking their shower in the morning and have their head under the water and looking up and saying, God, how did it get to be this sexy? Most people are just there in the shower thinking, well, how is this going to go wrong, or previewing the day or anticipating this or that. But being mindful is just to notice what you're thinking about without saying, no, I shouldn't think that way, or that's not true. Or say I could be in the shower, I could have the thought, well, I think the government's going to shut down next week, or they're not going to extend the continuing resolution. Being mindful is just noticing, oh, I'm having a thought about the continuing resolution, instead of saying, oh, no, I think they will pass it, or no, they won't pass it. Like, instead of reacting to the thought. So mindfulness is just being aware in that moment and having that self-awareness. So the question is, one of the first steps to being mentally tougher is, are you aware of your thinking, this constant dialogue that goes on? Breaking news, we think about 50,000 thoughts a day, and I already showed you the stats on those. About 77% of those for the average person are negative or counterproductive. So we've got to be aware of the thinking. We've got to be more mindful of what's going on. And then we have to be a little more skeptical. The third step here is, don't believe everything you think. Our brains create a lot of these thoughts that are not rational, they're not logical, they're not truthful. I actually like to call it internal fake news. And internal fake news to me is the worst kind of fake news. Number one, because it's about you. Number two, it's mostly negative. And number three, it's repetitive. We ruminate and go around and around and around. So I love this t-shirt I saw once, don't believe everything you think. And this is a great phrase that you think. And I've certainly had to learn this lesson in my life the hard way. My brain will create things that are just totally, like Mr. Spock would say in Star Trek, just not logical, just not rational. So I don't want to believe everything that I think. I need to be aware of this. And I think our mental health is really on a scale here. But if you're healthier, the more you're on the right-hand side of the scale, where my thoughts are just thoughts. A thought has no power to harm me unless I give it that power. It's just a thought. It's not the truth. It's not the God gospel truth. Just because I think it doesn't mean I have to analyze it. The more we struggle with this, the more we get caught up in mental health issues, and depression is the more on the left-hand side. My thoughts represent reality, or, maybe it is that way, it should be that way. So what you want to do is that you want to change how you relate to your thinking. Instead of, again, seeing it as the truth, you want to be a little more skeptical. So you don't want to just react to the mental activity. You want to see it as mental activity. And the seeing it, what we want to do here is have a separation between your constant dialogue of thoughts. So you're able to say, I am not my thoughts. My thoughts is not me. Just see it as the mental activity. So what I do a lot, I catch myself and I'll say something to myself, but there's a thought. Oh, I think my marriage is going to be a disaster and I'm going to end up getting divorced like my parents. There's a thought. Oh, there's going to be a shutdown next week. Oh, there's a thought. Oh, it might snow here next week. Oh, there's a thought. Sometimes I say a hi again, anxious thought, or there you are again. It's almost like I don't want to fight this process. I more want to tolerate this mental process that's going on. And I like the phrase catch and release. If you think of the analogy of going fishing and you catch the fish and then everybody's not upset about it because you're throwing the fish back into the water. Like, I catch the thought and release it. So in other words, I want to change my relationship to my thinking because it's less of a big deal if I can just see it and notice it and call it what it is, instead of saying, oh my God, OMG, exclamation point, or emoji sign, this is disaster, it's going to be the, it's like, there's so many people that are so dramatic, and I just think life is difficult enough. Instead of creating our own stress and making things worse than they have to be inside of our own head. And there's, life, the pain in life is inevitable, as I'd like to say, but misery is really optional. But we also have the mental law of substitution, which this is really the best news, that tells us only one thought at a time can be held by the conscious mind. It may seem like we're thinking many things at once, but if you slow it down, it really just is one thought at a time. This is why if you replace the thought with something else, that initial thought is now gone. If I was to say, I don't want anybody now to think about pink elephants or big, cuddly, fluffy pink elephants, of course, now we're all thinking about pink elephants. But if we were to say, pull the fire alarm, what happened to the thought about the pink elephants? It's now been substituted or replaced. This is also why I like to say if there's a tornado bearing down in your community, now everybody in that community has a wonderful marriage because nobody's thinking about the marriage, they're thinking about their tornado. So it's like, so we have to substitute it. So this is why I can say, as soon as I say, well, there's a thought, oh, there's another thought about the shutdown, or there's another thought about the weather, there's another thought about my finances. And sometimes it's almost like I'm glad, and I'm glad I caught you, and say, thank God that's just a thought. You know, if you ever had the experience of waking up from a bad dream and saying to yourself, well, thank God that was a dream, this really is the same thing. Being more mindful and being more self-aware is just like waking up from a dream, except you're awake and you're daydreaming, and you see it as what it is. It's not reality. It's just a thought that I'm thinking. And what's fascinating also is that not everybody thinks the same way. You know, you can have two employees that work for the same level, work for the same boss, same workload, same expectations. One just comes in and does their best and then goes home, but the other one has acid reflux and an ulcer and grinding their teeth at night and all kinds of manifestations of stress. It's just we think differently, but this is what we really want to do to be mentally tough, is see it as a separation. Don't believe it. Realize why it's negative. Realize why it has this bias. You know, the thing I used to say years ago is I used to say cancel. It's okay, mental law substitution. As soon as I notice a negative thought, I'd say cancel. But to me now, this is more reacting to the mental activity as opposed to just seeing it as mental activity. It's almost as if we have to tolerate the mental activity, and tolerating it a little more is just kind of calling it for what it is, saying there's a thought instead of fighting it and fighting it. You know, I know some people that wear an elastic around their wrist and then snap the elastic when they start to think of it. That may be fighting it a little bit, but as long as you can get it out. The next thing that we can do to be mentally tougher, there's a new revelation about anxiety that just was revealed last spring, and it's a very simple technique. And what you simply do is exhale longer than you inhale. They did a study in Stanford, Stanford University. Some of you might have heard about this in last spring, where they were finally able to genetically engineer some mice, and there was a certain neurons, it was called the locus coeruleus, inside of their brain. And what they did is they knocked out these cells with the genetic engineering, and they thought that these cells regulated certain types of breathing. We have inhaling, exhaling, and sighing is the exhale. And they knocked out the genes that they thought would prevent them from sighing. But what they realized is that the mice were still able to have the full repertoire of breathing. But what they noticed is these cells that they knocked out, they don't control or they don't regulate the breathing. All they simply do is report to the locus coeruleus about what the breathing is. So your body has no choice but to respond to this message. This is the autonomic nervous system. We have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight, which gets activated when you inhale. The sympathetic nervous system is when you exhale, the rest and digest. So when you exhale longer than you inhale, your brain, the locus coeruleus here in this image, sends signals to everything else in your brain that it's time to relax now. It's time to take it easy. So we've basically been given some bad advice. We've heard a lot, you know, just breathe, just take a deep breath, just go ahead and breathe. And, you know, in some ways that's really bad advice, because what we want to do is we want to take a breath in, but we really need to exhale double the amount of count that we're inhaling. So take a deep breath is not accurate. It's more like take a deep sigh. So if you inhale at a 4 count, if you can hold it, it's easier to exhale longer if you hold your breath for a little bit. And then if you exhale at an 8 count, and if you do this for a few cycles, it doesn't matter if you feel anxious. It doesn't matter if you feel stressed. It doesn't matter if you feel worried. It doesn't matter if you feel anxiety, you're not able to sleep. After a couple of rounds of this, you'll notice your body just automatically is relaxing. Your brain is sending the signal to all areas of the body. It's time to relax now. So just ask everybody to try this image on the screen here. Just take a breath in. You know, I take sigh in, 1, 2, 3, 4. I hold that for 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I exhale. You know what's fascinating? It's impossible to speak when you're exhaling. So you can only speak at the peak of the mouth. So take a breath in and exhale. If you try that a few times, especially if you're having trouble sleeping at night, you'll be amazed the difference that could make. So that's, you know, just one of the next techniques that we can do to be mentally tough. Next thing that we can do is sometimes just noticing the thought and exhaling is not good enough. It's not deep enough. Another technique that we really need to do, this gets into cognitive therapy now as it relates to being mentally tougher and as it relates to the neuroscience of all this. And And some of you have probably heard some of this, but a mental snowball is when you think one thing and you think a second, a third, and a fourth. It's like this image here, this guy with his head in his hands, and it's like getting the equivalent of getting stuck in the mud with your tires, and it just goes down a road, down a deeper road. And sometimes we get in these patterns, and neuroplasticity is really about the brain, and we can change it and rewire it, but sometimes our ruts are so deep where we have what's called automatic negative thoughts that we're not even aware of, and the same thoughts we've been thinking for 20 years, or some of us might hear old negative voices in our head from our parents from who knows how long ago. But a mental snowball is repetitive, and it's really harming your productivity. It's harming your effectiveness. And sometimes what we need to do is we need to take out a pen and piece of paper. And we need to take out a laptop. What I do is I use the Dragon Naturally Speaking in a software program. And you need to get clear on what it is. Write it out or speak it out or dictate it out. What is it exactly? What am I thinking about right now? Why am I feeling tense? Why am I feeling stressed? What is this about? You try to peel the layers of the onion, and it might seem counterintuitive, but to actually take some time and take 10, 15 minutes and say, let's go a little deeper on this. Let's dive down on this. Because what most people will do, they have the same anxious thought, for every 20 seconds for God knows how long. But if you actually just take the time and see what is it exactly, and once you define it, then you can speak up, talk back, poke holes in the logic. I'm going to talk briefly about cognitive distortions. This slide here is going to be too long. You won't be able to get all this, but I can send you these slides. First of all is jumping to conclusions without any credible evidence. You predict things will turn out badly. These are the top 10 things that we do to cause ourselves to not be mentally tough or to be mentally let our minds be the master. They're really thought distortions or thought sins, or this is really, again, part of cognitive therapy. But mind reading, there's lots of people that are experts in this. They predict that others people are reacting negatively to you. All or nothing thinking, overlook the good things, just see the bad. Overgeneralizing, you see a single negative event as an infinite pattern of defeat, using such words as never and always. Mental filtering, control delusions, emotional reasoning. A lot of people do this in the workplace, especially federal employees. Number 7 on emotional reasoning. You assume that things are the way you feel about them. In other words, you feel as though it's screwed up. You feel as though it's not going to work. So then you see it as that's just not going to work. It's screwed up. We forget that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Self-blame, labeling, personalization. These are really the top 10 things that we do to mess up our own inner processes, kind of the thought distortions that our brains will create. So you actually have to tell yourself, how is it inaccurate? How is it fake news? Why is it wrong? So again, write it down so you can clearly see the distortion, see what's going on. What are you worried about? What's the worst that could happen? Come up with counter arguments, just as if you were in a debate. Tell yourself why maybe that perhaps is not the God gospel truth. Tell yourself why you may not know for sure. Pull out factual examples from your past. A lot of times we discard the strengths that we have and the things we've overcome in our past, and we just kind of overlook that and say, wait a minute, I've dealt with something worse than this, and I can deal with this. This is nothing in comparison to that. We want to ridicule the opposition, break the pattern, break the cycle. And I want to give you a couple of my favorite phrases that I use that are very helpful. But I might say to myself, well, what evidence do I have? It's almost as if when your brain is creating these non-logical, these non-rational, these non-factual, these fake thoughts, you almost have to put that thought on trial and say to yourself, well, wait a minute, what evidence do I have that this thought is true? How do I know that this is going to be a disaster? And your gut feeling, if you've ever been on a trial in a courtroom, your gut feeling is not evidence. But what actual evidence do I have? How do I know for sure? And hopefully this can get you to say, well, I really don't know totally for sure. I don't have all the evidence. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe this will turn out well. Maybe this won't turn out well. But again, how do I know for sure? What evidence do I have? One of my favorites with worry, with possible future events, I like to say to myself, well, that's possible, but how likely is it? It's possible the Earth might get hit by a meteor, but how likely is it? It's possible my plane may crash. How likely is it? I mean, I have to look at the stats because this turns my brain around. I start thinking about the likelihoods as opposed to making the snowball bigger and going around and around with it. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, one day at a time. That's in the past now is another helpful phrase that I use. So these are just part of the speak up. What I'm saying again is speak up, talk back, poke holes in the logic. These are all the counter arguments. factual examples from your past. When I say ridicule the opposition, that's, I think we all have on one of our shoulders a negative kind of inner critic that says the sky is falling, this is going to be awful, this is going to be terrible. But we also have another voice on our other shoulder that things will work out, things will be okay. So it is kind of a debate between the rational and irrational side of you. And with mental toughness, I actually like to liken it to a committee. I actually think that, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just the crazy one, but I tend to think that we all have a committee inside of our head. Like we have a financial director sitting at a committee table. We have a physical fitness director. We have a friendship director, how the friends go into my life. We have a career director. We have a spouse director, how's my marriage going? We have all these directors in a room, and they're all kind of arguing about what we should do. And these are the thoughts. And I just want to kind of let this dialogue be in the back, be more mindful of it, and just see it as that dialogue. But so to melt your own mental snowballs is a great technique to be mentally tougher. The other thing we need to do to be mentally tougher is that you got to sleep. Sleeping at night at all costs. I've just come to realize that if you're tired, if you did not get a good night's sleep, your brain is going to be double as negative that next day. And it's going to come up. When I say 77-23, it'll probably be 95-10. And I just have to tell myself sometimes, listen, I just didn't get a good night's sleep last night. So ignore anything that this brain of mine creates. So what I like to say here is your brain is the creator that will create all these thoughts. But you are the director. The mind is kind of the director. So I'm going to separate the brain and the mind. So my mind is going to choose what I direct and what I dwell on and what goes on and on and on. But you got to sleep at night. Got to make it an absolute priority. If there's anything getting in the way, if any of you have sleep apnea, and you got to get that addressed. Got to get it looked at. Some pointers here in sleeping better. I found this blue light really screws up the melatonin in our brain. And we got to, at all costs, minimize this blue light. We can't have these devices on. This is on the iPhone. You can go to display and brightness, and you can put the night shift on at a certain time, so it shifts the colors of your display to the warmer end of the color spectrum to help you get a better night's sleep. Don't think you're going to watch all these crazy TV shows and Law and Order and then shut off the TV and think you're going to be able to sleep. Another thing that we can do is get a different focus. I find now if I just read something, it's much easier for me to fall asleep. And if I read something not about current events, just something like this Entertainment Weekly, about the movie previews or the fall TV shows or what's going to happen in the spring or summer movie preview, it's like my mind just gets a chance to get off the normal thoughts. Crossword puzzle, anything. Sometimes I do electronic chess, whatever I can take to get my mind off the regular stuff. The worst thing is just to be laying there and to be tossing. What ends up happening is our limbic systems, which is the fight or flight, or also the fear and the anger. If the limbic system is activated, then our cortex, or the thinking part, is not going to be activated. One way you can kind of soothe your limbic system is to get the cortex going. So you think of something else. So what I do sometimes now is, it's been medically proven that it's more relaxing for human beings to count down as opposed to counting up. That's why if you ever had anesthesia, they always say count down from 10 to 1. They never say count up from 1 to 10. So what I do is I'll do something like inhale 250, exhale 247, inhale 244, exhale 241, inhale 238, and then what comes next? Exhale 235. So now all of a sudden it becomes, what number am I on? Which is so much better than what's wrong with my life, or what's wrong with this, or what has to be fixed, or what's happening. And I've gotten used to these numbers now. So what I'll do occasionally is I'll just start up and say, okay, I'll say inhale 937 and minus by 6. So inhale 937, exhale 931, and then inhale 925. And it just gets my mind off the everyday stuff and works much better. But whatever you can do to sleep, meditation, diet, exercise, got to get a different focus. Journaling is also helpful. It's been medically proven that it's good for you to journal, get thoughts out. This is why the mental snowball melt. If you actually write things out, it's one clear way to get things out of your head, get it on a piece of paper, get it on the computer, whatever it can be. But if you journal for 15, 20 minutes before you go to bed, just write about everything that's coming up, and you just want to have a clear mind to get all that out. What's not mentioned here, which should be, is exercising. And I've really found lately that group fitness is the way to go. A group yoga class, a group exercise class. I just found once I started these group classes, totally pushed myself more than I ever would if I just go to the gym by myself and, You get much more endorphins that way, and it really helps with all the thoughts and getting them out of your head. So sleeping at all costs should be an absolute priority. Also, to quiet the noise. I'm sure a lot of you figured with mental toughness, a lot of this will be about mindfulness, and also we will be talking about slowing down and kind of pushing out the noise and quieting the noise. Meditation is another way to say this, and if you can do this a certain number of times a week, 3, 4, 5 times a week, 10 minutes a shot at least, or 15 minutes, you could just set an alarm clock to stop yourself. But imagine if you're sitting here and all these clouds above this person's head are just various thoughts, and you want to let these thoughts be just like the clouds, like the high white cumulus clouds. You just want to notice them and let them go by. Notice them and let them go by. Here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to pick one of them out and argue with them and say, no, I shouldn't think this way. And to do the meditation really does help with the mindfulness as well, because what you can do is just notice your dialogue and just see it as what it is, as a dialogue. But you don't notice this till you shut out all the other stimulations, till you shut out all the other devices and the televisions. And, some of us, we have a busy mind. You have a busy mind when you need stimulation all the time. You can't fall asleep without the TV on. I mean, all these things on. Nowadays we can't even watch a TV show without a ticker on the bottom that has the sports scores of the stock market things. But we actually want to get rid of all these distractions so you can just sit there, just you and your thoughts, just you and, I like to say, your internal noise. And so you'll be able just to see it for what it is and hopefully have more of that separation. It's almost as if you're sitting at a movie theater and you just see on the screen all the thoughts that you're having that just go across the screen, but you want to get that separation. If you're to do this, you notice your pulse go down, your blood pressure would go down, your heart rate would go down. There's all kinds of studies on this that are just amazing. They actually did one at Mass General here where I'm at. I'm out in Massachusetts, and Harvard Medical, where they did functional MRI scanning, which they didn't have when I was doing scans. And they noticed that certain parts of the brain would shrink, certain gray matter, and certain gray matter would go smaller. The amygdala is the part of the brain that really anticipates and is part of this limbic system. We actually have 2 amygdalas on each hemisphere in the fight or flight response, but those shrunk from doing meditation for 15 minutes 3 times a week with folks that have never done this before. And certain other parts of the brain, like the posterior cingulate cortex, parts that respond differently to stress, actually got thicker or stronger from doing this. So the way you do this, start off slowly. If you can do it 15 minutes 4 times a week, that would be great. Don't expect it to be perfect. Be gentle with yourself, and find a quiet place with no interruptions. Have a focal point where to place your attention. And then what you do when thoughts arise, you just gently catch yourself and gently return back to the focal point. You don't say, oh, you stupid idiot, I told you I wouldn't be able to do this, or I can't meditate. The interesting dichotomy with this is the more you think you can't do this, or the more this drives you nuts, the more you actually need to do it. But it's just to sit there non-judgmentally and just don't judge yourself. There's a thought. Let me just come back to the breath. So I notice the inhale, notice what it feels like as my lungs are filled up with air. Notice what it feels like when I exhale. The focal point for most new people can be the breathing, just the process of that. It could also be a phrase or a mantra. With TM, it was a phrase, a mantra, but it doesn't matter what the focal point is, but just make this have a place where you place your attention. And then when thoughts arise, gently catch yourself and gently return back to the focal point. Understand you never stop. You just gently catch yourself and return. Just notice and return, notice and return. If all you do for 10 or 15 minutes is notice and return, that's so much better than letting those thoughts suck you in. The thoughts, again, are very seductive. They want to pull you in. They're like saying, think me, think me. If you've ever seen this game at a carnival called Whack the Mole or Slam the Mole, the thought will pop up and say, you come down this road with me. It's like a train, steam train building up speed. You don't want to let it build up speed. You don't want to argue with it. You don't want to fight it back with it. You just want to notice it. It's almost like when it comes, don't run from it. When it leaves, don't chase after it. Just don't do this, go round and round with it. Just say, notice and return, come back to the breathing. Understand you never stop your mind. You just notice and return. Just notice the thoughts and return. Even people that have done this, or monks that have been doing this for years and years, that's all they do. But the health benefits to this are just amazing, off the charts. The number of scientific papers that have been written about mindfulness, meditation, cognitive theory, mental toughness, writing down your thoughts, getting a different relationship with your thoughts. It's just amazing. You know, the other thing is that you create more room to think of new solutions. You know, most of the 50,000 thoughts you're having today, you had yesterday. Most of the thoughts you're having today, you're going to have tomorrow. So there's very little room for like new things, new ideas, new things that come into your mind. And this helps us be less reactive. It actually does change your brain. Just like if you're doing weightlifting on your biceps for 15 minutes, 4 times a week, you'd see some changes in that muscle. But neuroplasticity is something that's been medically proven the last couple of decades. The brain does change. We can change our brain. We can rewire it. We can savor good experiences. We can create new neural networks and get out of these negative ruts that we're always been in. It's just an amazing way to look at it. And this is the example. This is the amygdala there, that little sickle-shaped device. Kind of looks also like a walnut. That's part that shrinks through doing this. And quieting the noise. You can also coach others. I know a lot of you are at high levels, or perhaps GS-15s or so, or in the federal government. A lot of you probably have people reporting to you. But a lot of times what we can do if we're in a leadership position and people are getting caught up in self-created problems or self-created stress or creating things in their mind, you can absorb it or validate it. You know, nobody wants to hear, well, you shouldn't think that way, you shouldn't feel that way. You know, that's kind of how people feel. But, you know, if you can validate it, say, you know, I know that's frustrating. I can't blame you for feeling that way. I can't blame you for thinking that way. And then as a leader, if you can kind of redirect or reframe people and get them to say, yeah, I can see that's frustrating. However, what do you think that we can do collectively that's under our control to make it a little better? I always like to use the phrases, and when I do these group trainings with employees and I'm trying to get them to be less stressed and more productive and more effective, we always say, what can you do that's under your control to make it better? And what can you stop doing that's accomplishing nothing but to make it worse than it already has to be? So I want to redirect. First of all, you want to listen to people, know that you're a listener, have them know that you care, and say, yes, I know that's tough. And, you know, let them get it out, fire all the missiles. And at some point say, okay, well, what do you think that we can do collectively? What do you think you can do? You know, maybe we can get more organized. Maybe we can change the way that we approach things. And, you know, I always like to draw the line with employees. I say, draw a line and say, at what point is my focus on this now becoming counterproductive? You know, where is that line? You know, someone can say, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm upset about how things are going, or I'm overwhelmed. I say, you know, I can't blame that. That's valid. I don't want to invalidate that. But we want to try to solve it. We want to try to fix it. But the question is, at what point is this now becoming counterproductive? Meaning there's some people that are just experts in their problems, you know, not in solving them, but in just describing them to other people, and could just go on and on and on. So I say the 3 questions. Number 1, what can I do that's under my control to make it better? Number 2, what can I stop doing that just makes it worse than it already has to be? And then the third one that some people are experts in, which is how bad is it? How bad is it? And could just go on and on. So I want to try to find that line. We also want to coach people and say, hey, what is it costing you? When you let your mind be the master and when you let yourself get upset by this, what is that doing to you health-wise? I think we have to realize there's a word disease, and a lot of physicians now are kind of taking this word and dividing it and have disease. A lot of times the body is in disease because the mind is in disease. And disease that really goes together. You can't separate the mental health from the physical health. And, you know, stress really is, it can be a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that just creates bodily tension and contributes to disease in human beings. So in other words, we have to be able to say, you know what, life is short and my health is number one. And life is short and my health is number one. Thinking this way is just not helping me. And what is this costing me? So one thing that we can do as a leader and try to bring people together and say, what is it costing us? We can't afford to think this way. At what point is it now becoming counterproductive? I would hold a staff meeting, let people get it all out, get all the worst case scenarios out, and say, okay, now let's redirect, let's reframe this, let's bring it on something else, which would be much better. And also, another strategy with mental toughness I want to do, I just want to go through a couple of these, is looking at before I get to this one, is seeing the splendor, seeing the things that we are grateful about. A lot of times we overlook this, and gratitude really is the number one thing, the number one defense, I think, against self-created stress. Just seeing what is going well in our life. I like to divide this up. You know, there's always 2 things in life. There's how things could be improved, how things could be better. I could be in better shape. I could make more money. My agency could be more organized. Things could be clearer. We could get more direction from the head office or from the regional office. All these things could be improved. But that's one part of life. And if you're totally on this side of the scale, you might be a perfectionist, always looking how things could be. It's always good to strive for improvement, but if you're too much on that end, it's not healthy. What's the other end of the scale here? How awesome my life is right now. So we have to be somewhere in the middle here between how things could be improved and things could be better. And if you're totally on the left-hand side, you could be a total couch potato, just looking at a Pollyanna phrase and everything's just wonderful. But one thing that we can do is just, we can ask ourselves a better question. A lot of times, since the mental processes and the mental law of substitutions, it's only one thought at a time can be held by the conscious mind. The quality of our life really is dependent in a lot of ways by the questions we ask ourselves. And questions are key because human beings were exclusionary creatures. We can only take in so much information at once. There's just too much available to us. You know, for example, just look around the room that you're in and just notice everything in the room that you're in that's blue. Just looking at the colors here. I'm just looking to see what in the room is blue. And now can you close your eyes and say to yourself anything in the room that was red or maroon? You know, probably not, because not as many as the blue, because we were looking for the blue. So if you open your eyes and look around, do you see a lot more red? I do here. I have a red pillow. I have a red pair of scissors or red knickknack. It just goes to show that whatever we get in life, whatever we're looking for in life is exactly what we're going to get, because there's just too much to be thrown at our brain. It's going to only process so much at once. This is why we have unconscious biases on things to help us process all this information. So one of the best things we can do is ask ourselves a different question. We'll get a different answer. And the quality of our life really is dependent upon the quality of thoughts that we think and the quality of questions that we ask ourselves. So you can change your mental state on the stop of a dime, not only from exhaling longer than you're inhaling, not only from doing these other techniques, but ask yourself a different question. So what am I grateful about in my life right now? And some people would say, oh, my health or my family, my kids, my job, and then they just kind of go on to the next thing or what's wrong with their life. But if you ask yourself the follow-up question, you know, what about that makes me grateful? What about that is special? What about that is unique? What about that is really awesome? I think we forget this second question, because what we can start to create is what's called a positive mental snowball as we go on. And looking for a positive mental snowball, I think of one good thing, of a second good thing. It might be something similar to, I always want to remember when, or I'll never forget when, or I love it when. What happens when you get home? What is that cuteness with the family, or who greets you, whatever it is. But what am I grateful about? What about that makes me grateful? And then how does that make me feel? You know, and you try to expand out the word good as much as you can, because you don't want to just say good. You want to see that as much as you can. And really my secret weapon now with this is I'm just using the iPhone. I'm using the notes, and I'm using the microphone button down on the bottom, the microphone button right near the space bar. I just kind of talk into this. Hopefully most of you are doing this. Hopefully when you're texting, you're not pressing one character at a time. And I just try to dictate. I say, new line dash, seeing Olivia come downstairs in the morning in her dog costume. New line dash, seeing Olivia so enthusiastic in the morning. Olivia is now my 12-year-old. In some ways, you know, now that she's becoming a teenager, she may not be as cute as she was back in 2014 when I started doing this, but she's still cute, but I need to find that. But I just dictate this in here. I try to get 5-10 things a day. Towards the end of the day, I'll just dictate when I'm driving. And now my mind is starting to change what it is I'm looking for, because I'm looking at different things. And dictating into a phone is a great way to do it. You can also do it in writing. You can do it before you go to bed as well. There's also some power questions from Tony Robbins. You can ask yourself, what am I excited about in my life right now? What about that makes me excited? How does that make me feel? What am I enjoying most in my life right now? What about that do I enjoy? How does that make me feel? What am I proud about in my life right now? What about that makes me proud? How does that make me feel? What am I committed to in my life right now? What about that makes me committed? How does that make me feel? Is another good way to look at this. Just ask yourself a different question, and it's just amazing. So I also wanted to get to, there was a slide here on finding the momentum. The more you can laugh, I'm going to do some questions, and I got some final thoughts I want to give you here. But first of all, the more you can laugh, they've done studies on this. The number of times that adults laugh is just pathetic. The number of times children laugh is amazing. The frequency that adults laugh is just pathetic. We just do not laugh enough. And ask yourself, when's the last time you had a belly laugh? That you really just out of control, but from the belly. And, nowadays it's so much easier with Netflix and Comedy Central and all these shows. And I'm watching one lately called Vice Principals that's on, I don't know if that's HBO or Netflix or whatever, but really just makes a difference in our whole body chemistry, our brain chemistry. Spend time with animals, not people that act like animals, but actual animals, dogs and cats. What's amazing with them is that they're always in the present moment. And you never see a dog, think that they have the cognitive thought, I wonder if I'm a good enough dog. They're always just there in the moment. About the exercise, I'm really just, group exercise to me now is really the way to go with a lot of this. Constantly fill your mind with positive messages. Tell yourself what's going well in your life instead of filling it with the negative. I think we have to have what's called an equal time amendment. We have to have an equal time rule, which I have in my brain. If I'm going to ponder, if I'm going to entertain thoughts about how I don't want things to go, how I don't want things to work out, how I fear things are going to go, I also need to give equal time to how I'd like things to go, how I'd like things to turn out, visualizing things happening the way I'd like it to be, and get that in my mind, get those neural networks going. The way it is with the neuroplasticity is that it's the survival of the busiest. Because that when we sleep at night, the networks that we're not using get deleted. So what neural networks are the busiest? That's why we say the neurons that fire together wire together. You become what you think about most of the time. That's why I'm going to keep filling it up with the positive. See things working out with Olivia, even when she was a teenager. Imagine her still giving me hugs and being nice and polite to her daddy. Set realistic daily goals and give yourself a reward for completing. There's something about checking off. I check things off. I make a grunt symbol or a grunt sound like I'm lifting weights. And we need to break things down into little chunks, give ourselves treats and rewards for completing them. Set realistic daily goals. Give yourself a reward for completing. Take walks in nature. There's something about being outside. There's something about exercising and being outside that you're giving your mind the explicit instructions that my life is calm. My life is in order. My life is okay. Everything is fine right now. There's no crisis. There's no emergency. Schedule time to have fun. I think most of us nowadays in our crazy, busy society, if it's not scheduled, it's not going to happen. So schedule time to do something fun. Schedule time to go to a play. It's winter now. I mean, schedule time to go to a hockey game. When you're sitting there in the hockey game, just tell yourself, I'm not going to ponder my life. I don't need to figure anything out now. I'm just going to enjoy the game or do something. I just think we don't do enough that we actually enjoy. You ask yourself, when's the last time you did something that you enjoyed? Or what did you enjoy this weekend? Did you do things out of guilt this weekend? Did you clean things up because you felt as though you had to clean? Did you enjoy that? Or was it just you thought you had to do it out of obligation or guilt? But spend some time doing things that you enjoy. Take some time to quiet your mind a few times a week, doing the meditation, doing the things we were just looking at. Absolutely is a good way to do it. And focus on what you have instead of what it is you think that you're lacking. A lot of times what we think we're lacking, we need to balance it out with what it is that we have. And that's a much better way to look at it. Also on me, I'm going to get to questions in a moment. My email address, again, is kevin@kevinstacy.com. You can follow me at Kevin Speaker. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, which comes out once a month. This is what that looks like. Also, my book, Mind Right, Navigate the Noise, How to Deal with Your Internal Fake News for Success, Resiliency, Mental Toughness, and Peace of Mind will be coming out soon this spring. Also, for those of you with the federal executive boards, I'll be appearing in Philadelphia next week on the 13th. Also in the Buffalo Federal Executive Board on March 28th and the San Antonio Federal Executive Board on April 17th. But let's go to questions, and let me stop sharing the screen so you can see me. Looking at the chat here, I got from Andre, vanilla cream bean from Starbucks is my reward. I like the candle idea, so those are some things that we can enjoy as I scroll down here. Getting focused, and what I'm going to do here with the participants is I am going to unmute everybody. And then I will actually, maybe I should, maybe I will mute. I will just say on the bottom there, when you click participants, there's a button where you can raise your hand so I can call on you. Equipped to deal, resilient. Let me just read some of these. I am in. A friend once told me that you should not focus on a candle when meditating with open eyes. Do you have an opinion on using a candle? I don't mind using a candle. I just think the big thing with meditation, this is a question from Stephen, is that you want to just slow down the mental activity. There's a thing called the electroencephalogram, where it shows the electrical activity in the brain. And you want to have some focal point where it just slows down that process. And if a candle works, a candle works. I'm very flexible on what the focal point is. There's some really strict sects of meditation or disciplines would say you must focus on this, or doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's effective enough to slow down your usual chatter and give you something else to focus on. You could be counting down, or it could be something different, whatever it is. But there also is a way to meditate where you walk, and when you're a walking meditation, you do keep your eyes open slightly, and then you're just noticing the weight shift from the heel to the balls of the foot. And sometimes when the left foot hits, you say this step, and when the right foot hits, you say now. So this step now, as I'm walking, I can see that. Candle, yeah, gives your focal point moves. Yeah, the candle could work. I haven't tried the candle that much, but if that works for you, whatever works for you is totally fine. Mark says, thank you very much. It's been great. Any recommendations for meditation apps? Chris says, one thing I found, there's so many apps on there. There's an app called Relax, but I don't actually like that because it was suggesting you inhale just as long as you exhale. And one of the secrets I told you here today, it's been medically proven that the cure for anxiety is to exhale longer than you inhale. So sigh, a longer sigh. Don't take a deep breath. Well, take a deep breath, but make sure you're exhaling or sighing out longer than you're inhaling. So now I fooled around with some of the apps. There's not really one that I like more than the other. For me, it's a little less on the apps, more with just sitting there with my eyes closed and focusing on the inhales and the exhales. Sometimes what I do now is I'll do the count. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 on the inhale, hold it for 4, and then exhale on the 8. But I don't want to have a lot of dialogue about it. I don't want to evaluate, was that a good inhale? Was that a good exhale? I don't want to just have that. Just trying to get to the gap between the thoughts and expand that gap a little more. Mark says one app I like is Free Rain Sounds app. It has a soothing recordings of rain falling and babbling brooks. Sometimes I use that to fall asleep. So a sound also can be a good focal point. So the babbling brooks and the rain falling. So this app is called the Free Rain Sounds app. And if anybody wants to ask me a verbal question, what you can do is just click on participants, and then on the bottom, you just highlight your name and you can raise your hand. I don't think I see a hand raised at this point, but then I can call on you. But sometimes that's stressful for folks because everybody can see you when you start speaking and they can hear you. So maybe some people want to do it a little differently. SensorWeb's a great session. That's definitely what I expected. Good. I just think, again, I can't say enough that, one thing with life is that, we all have an expiration date, and when your time is up, your time is up, whatever that number is for you. And I've just made a decision in my own life. I'm approaching 50 now. I'll be 50 later on this year. And it's been a little trying, but, my life is more than half over. And my life is more than half over. I refuse to spend the time I have remaining inside of my own head. My head creates all kinds of a cesspool of negativity and crap. I am not going to let it suck me in. I am not going to let it stress me out. I mean, I know there's going to be challenges. I know there's days are going to be healthy. There's days are going to be sick. I know things are going to happen with other things, but I'm not going to make it any worse than I already have to be. And a very interesting exercise, if you write down, I forget what the life expectancy is now for men and women. I think it's actually gone down a little bit with the opioid crisis in this country. One of the first times our expectancy is heading the other direction. But say if the life expectancy is 88 for men, it might be a little less. Maybe that's for women. Say if it's 85 for men, I got 35 years left, but how many of those are going to be good years? Let's say I got about 30 good years left. So I am just going to look at what I'm grateful about and what I enjoyed with it. And now, with the participants, let me see. I've got someone that raised their hand, and let me unmute. And I will say, Sean, cheers. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, my question is, how do you restart your intention to be positive when you've been discouraged, by something?
Well, one thing I think that can help with that is to do something physical. So the question is, again, how do I restart my intention to be positive when you've been hit with a lot of negativity? And I think sometimes we can think ourselves to feeling better, but sometimes we actually need to do something like write somebody a letter that we don't intend to send. Like we need to get the emotion out of our body. I think we hold a lot of emotion in our body. And a lot of times this fight or flight response, we usually either fight or run. But nowadays in modern society, we just sit there. So instead of just sitting there, there's somebody that frustrated you or a person. If it's around another person, write them a letter that you don't intend to send. Like, get it all out. Say what you need to say, and then write back a response, what you wish they would say back to you, how you wish they would apologize and acknowledge. Another thing you can do is hit a bag with a stick. There's something about hitting something, the act of hitting. Pretend that bag is anything you want to be. I also recommend you go to the dollar store, buy a case of $1 glasses. Take a magic marker, write your frustrations down on the glasses, and whip these glasses into a large recycling bin so they smash. Like, there's just something about this to get it out. And then once you've done the physical part, then start doing the writing and saying, hey, this is how I want things to be to move forward. This is how I want things to go. This is how I want my life to go. This is how I want this career to go. I want to wake up every morning. I want to get into that office, and this is how I would like to project. This is how I would like to behave. This is what I can control. I want to not be stressed. I want to be in the moment. I want to be helpful. See yourself being productive and helpful and not being stressed. And yet can't control other people. You know, one thing I like to say is that not everybody's normal. You know, not everybody's got the right medication or the right diagnosis, right treatment. Not everybody is all there, but we can't let these negative people get us down. And Erica said, yes, I will email you a copy of the slides, Erica. Anyone else have like to raise their hand and ask a verbal question? And I'll just scroll down on here. Kenny said, breath of fresh air. Yeah, Erica will send you a copy of the slides. Copies of the slides. Sean, Candle, yeah. Absolutely, we will send you that. Very good. I got 1256. I'm still here on the line. You know, actually, I will unmute everyone. So everyone's unmuted now. So if you want to speak, you don't even raise your hand. Just go ahead and start speaking.
And I had any recommendations on times of the day meditation?
Times of the day for meditation, Chris?
Yeah.
Well, if you have trouble sleeping, definitely before bed. They say the mind is more open to suggestion first thing in the morning and then at night, because it doesn't have a lot of that dialogue going on as it does in the middle of the day. And, you know, I never actually, Sean, I never talked about the subconscious mind, Chris. The subconscious mind, you can program that as well, and that has no choice but to follow out the instructions we give it. So I'd say the morning or the evening, a little more open to suggestion. I listen to some guided tapes. I listen to some hypnotherapy things in the morning to get my mind in the right mindset as well. And, you know, visualizing myself being powerful, visualizing myself being confident, visualizing the presentations I give going well. You should visualize your day going well. Visualize things happening well in the office. And, you know, this is how we want to, you know, our brains are plastic. We can change our brains with this neuroplasticity. Why not give yourself a chance to do that? And I will, any other questions? I'm looking on the chat here. Anybody want to ask anything else? Yeah, I think with the registration, I got the email addresses, so it'll be easy for me to send that. Anybody in the Philadelphia area? Again, I'll be there on the 13th, the week from tomorrow. Those federal executive boards are actually really good. They have a lot of presentations people can go to, and I think training is a great thing. And hopefully the continuing resolution will be extended, I guess. Is that this? Yeah, that's later on this week. So again, a lot of life we can't control. 99.9% of life we just can't do anything about. But there's one thing I definitely can do something about is my internal processing. Not what comes up. My brain creates that, but my mind is the director. I am the director, and I am going to notice this. I'm going to be mindful of it. I'm going to pay attention to it. I become what I think about most of the time. And I'm sure some of you have heard about The Secret. The Secret was all about this. We become what we think about most of the time. So we think about how we want things to go, not how we fear things to go. if I want more material possessions in my life, I don't go around thinking I want more material possessions or I need more money. What you do is you say, thank God, I'm so grateful for what I already have. And then that brings you more of the feeling of gratefulness, which attracts more material possessions. But anyway, I will stop the main presentation here. I'll stay on the line if anybody wants to ask me anything. But just remember that life is short and your health is number one. And you're too blessed to be stressed. And we're all too blessed to be stressed. It's just a matter of degree. How much do we realize it or how much do we overlook it? So thank you so much for your time and attention today. And again, I'll be on the line if you want to ask me something with less people on the line. But if you're all set, you can drop off from the line. Again, thank you so much for your time and attention. Hey, Kevin. I can see you, Kevin. Yeah, Stephen, repeat with a focus on the subconscious. Yes, that's possible, and you can ask Michelle Zager about that and talk you through some things. And I didn't want to get too off the norm. Sometimes people prejudge things depending on. I want to talk more about resiliency or call it that, but I want to be careful with some of the things we say. All right, very good. Any questions for me, Joseph? Can you hear me, Joseph?
Oh,
yep.
Yeah, I do.
What city are you in, Joseph?
I am in Virginia.
Good. Good. You happy about the Super Bowl last night?
It's ridiculous, but I don't really do it.
No.
Having grown up in Africa, so
Right.
The only sport I like is soccer.
Good. Well, hopefully that gives you a mental break. This is why we have sports. We need a mental break from our life, a mental break from all the frustrations. So if it's soccer,
Yeah,
that's
it
great.
does.
Good. That's the point of it. And so while I'm watching the soccer game or watching the football game, what am I thinking about? Hopefully nothing, just the game.
Yeah.
Don't need to figure anything out now. Don't need to analyze anything. And I think a lot of us realize our best ideas come up when we're, are not actively trying to think of things, and things pop in our minds. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
All right. I think I will end there and end the meeting. Thanks so much, Michelle. I appreciate it.